Good morning. This is Pastor Stuart Waterhouse with my video blog 10 Minutes After Midnight. Today's episode is actually an introduction. I want to introduce you to, give you a preview of what my full-length video will be about. And the subject is Christian Zionism and the origins of Christian Zionism and how it contradicts the Bible. I'm not going to get into the evil deeds of Zionists. We know it's horrible. We know the methods of genocide is particularly gruesome, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm just going to get into the origins of Zionism because it's demonic. It was taught to certain Christian preachers and certain other Christian scientists that spread this evil doctrine. There's no such thing as Jewish Zionism, and this is an extremely important distinction because there is no Jewish religion teaching in the Torah that supports Zionism. Religious Jews mostly reject Zionism. A few may, but there's only Christian Zionism and then its companion political Zionism. Political Zionism is what we see in Israel. Predominantly they're atheist Zionist. Zionism, political Zionism, was founded by atheists. They didn't believe in God, and that's why there's no moral bounds. That's why they can do the evil they do. But it is supported by and was directly contributed to and created by Christian Zionists. Christian Zionism came first, and that is what will be in the next video. So you only have political Zionism and Christian Zionism. There is no Jewish Zionism. So my message is not anti-Semitic, and in a moment I'm going to go into detail to prove it's not anti-Semitic. There's a very big difference between anti-Zionism and being against Jews. I'm not against Jews. I have very good friends who are Jews, and I support the Jewish people, and I will get into that. But in my next video, I will talk about the occult origins of Zionism, because it came from the occult. It was directly taught by demons to certain individuals. And I'm going to talk about the seances they held. I'm going to talk about all that in the next one. First, let me show you a bone of a sheep here. I picked this bone up on the side of Mauna Kea at about 6,000 foot elevation. Our island is made of two mountains, actually 3 or 4, but 2 huge mountains is Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa. And of course, we don't want to forget about Hululai. But Mauna Loa is the biggest volcano in the world, and it is still active. I've seen it erupt. At the top of Mauna Loa, you can see a huge crater, and in that crater is a lake of lava, the largest in the world volcano. You can imagine in the book of Revelation the lake of fire, full of brimstone and sulfur. And I wonder where God's going to gather the lava to make that lake, perhaps from Mauna Loa. We are the largest. And so I picked up this sheep bone up there because a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, and even in my next video, deals with sheep. Demon possession of sheep. Let me tell you a little story first. There was a sheep, and he was being chased by a wolf. And for safety, the sheep ran into the temple. And of course, the big bad wolf, he can't go in the temple. That's sacred ground. So he had to stand outside the temple, but he wanted the sheep, and the sheep had fled in there. And so the wolf cries out to the sheep and says, "You better come back outside, because in there, if the priest finds you, he's going to sacrifice you." And the sheep replies to the wolf, "What do I care whether I'm sacrificed or whether you eat me? It's kind of the same thing." And the wolf replied, "Oh, narrow-minded sheep, it's not the same thing. To me, there's a big difference." And you see, we're all sheep, and we're running from Satan, and we flee to the church for safety. But in the church, when the Christian Zionist preacher finds you, he's going to sacrifice you on the altar of Zionism. And those that are sacrificed on the altar of Zionism You share in the sins of Zionism, the rape of little boys, the murder of little girls, the genocide Israel's committing. Your lot, your share, will be in the lake of fire. Now, I'll give you a little bit of preview of what I'm going to talk about in my next video. How Zionism started from the occult. Let's go backward a little bit to the age of the Druids. You know, Zionism is new to Christianity. Christian Zionism is a brand new doctrine. Relatively new anyway. It's been around now for over 100 years. But historically, it was not part of Christianity at all. Our church founding fathers didn't teach that. Neither did Jesus, neither did the apostles, neither did Paul. It wasn't taught at all. It's a brand new doctrine. And it's a brand new doctrine that came straight from the occult, from communicating with a sacrificed sheep brought up in seance. And I'll talk about that background, okay? And I'll give you the name of the demon. I'll give you the name of the sheep, okay? I'll give you the name of those who communed with this demonic entity. But right now I'm not. This is just a preview to get you to watch my next video. But this sheep, you see, the ancient Druids practice sacrifice. Not too many human sacrifice, mostly animal. You know, I just completed a whole series on human sacrifice. And when the Druids sacrificed a human, usually it was just the king. It wasn't that common. You know, as you learned in my previous video on human sacrifice, it is a result of a contract which is broken, and thus the penalty would be sacrifice, the death of the person who breaks the contract. And you know, between the king and the people, there is an implied contract, okay? The king is supposed to bring prosperity, supposed to bring abundance of harvest. And in the ancient Druids, when there was famine and you know the crops didn't grow, there was a drought, then it was the king's fault. The king wasn't righteous, and as a result, famine hit the land. So the king would be sacrificed in order to restore righteousness. But for the most part, the Druids sacrificed animals. And as you had learned in my previous videos on sacrifice, the animals were mostly a portend of what is to come, okay? The animal couldn't pay the penalty of wrongdoing or sin. It couldn't correct that kind of thing. It would take a human sacrifice, the sacrifice of the king, perhaps, according to the Druids. But as to the animal, what the Druids would do when they sacrificed an animal, they would study its dying spasms, you know, the twitching of the body, and they would use that for divination, you know, to foretell the future. And so one day there was a sheep that the Druids sacrificed, and I'll give you in my next video the name of this poor sheep. And for somehow it captured the imagination of the devils, of the evil angels, and one of them entered the sheep and possessed it while it was dying on the sacrificing altar. And even after it died, it continued to possess that sacrifice, and it has been brought up in seances. You can't go in your basement and bring it up in a seance. You have to go where the Druids, and I will give you that location, sacrifice that particular sheep. And the apparition, this non-human ghost, is still possessed by the demon that entered the body of that dying sheep. And people that have held seances with that sheep describe, you know, it's got sunken black eye sockets with a glowing red pupils piercing through that darkness. The body is half decomposed and rotten, you know, the corpse, and the smell is horrendous. The person that conjures this apparition up, the stink is unbearable. I'll go into all that. I'm not going to go into it here, but it is that sheep that conjured up, that taught those who communed with it Christian Zionism. It doesn't come from the Bible. The Bible totally denounces Christian Zionism, and I'll go into that next time. But first, you know, because there's confusion as whether anti-Zionism, which I'm anti-Christian Zionism, and I'm anti-political Zionism, there is no Jewish Zionism, which is very important because anti-Zionism is not anti-Jew, okay? And I got to tell you a couple stories about my life so you understand that. I have nothing against my Jewish friends, my Jewish fellow human beings. Nothing at all. And in fact, if Christian Zionism is destroying the Christian church, which it is, political Zionism is destroying the reputation of Jews, so that there's all kinds of crimes being committed by against Jews worldwide and in the United States as a backlash to the genocide that political Zionism, supported by Christian Zionism, is committing in Palestine. And, you know, I was pallbearer for a lady who was in a concentration camp in Auschwitz. Okay, she was a young girl. And while she was alive, I talked to her about her experiences in the concentration camp. And of course, she only saw that then through the eyes of a child, even though she grew to be she survived. But when she passed on, I was pallbearer at her funeral. Of course, she had a Jewish funeral. A rabbi held the service, and I spoke to the rabbi. But I just wanted to point out, you know, I'm not anti-Jewish. I was pallbearer for some of the Jews that were persecuted by Hitler. Okay? For real. You know, I lived for a while in the deep South. I occasionally attended a little country church that was on a dirt road way in the middle of nowhere. And I mean in the middle of nowhere. They didn't have a pastor. They were having a hard time finding a pastor. So their habit was to invite a guest speaker. And, you know, after a while, you run out of local guest speakers. And especially if you can find one coming in from out of town, they were happy to have him come and speak because they didn't have a preacher. So one weekend at church service, I'm sitting in the congregation and the guest speaker arrived and nobody had met him before. I'm not sure how he got invited to speak because they didn't know who he was. But he was a good speaker, but he got up behind the pulpit and he took out his Bible and he started to preach, and then he got sidetracked. He started talking about who he was and where he was from. He was from New York. Well, we could tell that from his accent. But he was Jewish, and he wanted to tell his story. He was converted from Judaism to Christianity. But he never had the chance to tell his story because the moment he said he was Jewish, you know, there's a lot of prejudice against Jews in certain Bible Belt areas, and some people in the congregation, they stood up and denounced him immediately for being a Jew and told him he wasn't welcome. And somebody else stood up and tried to read verses out of the Bible that they thought would denounce Jews. And it was almost a riot that broke out in that little country church because they weren't going to hear a message preached by a Jew. And I think the preacher began to fear for his life. And all he did was close his Bible and he walked out. I immediately got up and I intercepted him halfway to his car. He was going to get in his car and drive off. Well, he couldn't preach. I mean, it was kind of almost a riot. And like I said, he was scared. He was terrified. And I intercepted him halfway to his car. And I said, you know, normally after a service, the preacher stands next to the exit door and he shakes hands with everybody willing to shake hands as they go out the exit, and you know, gives them their greeting, the preacher's greeting. And I said, I tell you what, if you go back to the exit of that door, the congregation will be coming out in a moment, but I will stand with you. I said, I will stand with you, even if I'm all alone. I will stand with you, and that way you won't be alone, because I will stand with you. And everybody will have to walk past you, and they'll have to face their racism. And he looked at me in the eyes. I could see a tear come down his cheek. And he turned and he walked back toward the church with me next to him. And we stood there as the people came out. Most people looked the other way. They wouldn't look at him as they walked past, let alone shake his hand. They looked away. so they wouldn't have to see him. 2 people out of the whole church shook his hand. There were the only 2 people that looked at him. Everybody else just turned their back on him when he went past. But I stood with him, even if I stood alone. Even if I had to face everybody in that community, because I knew everybody in that church. That means I had to stand against my friends. So I don't want to ever hear anybody say that I'm anti-Semitic, because I'm not. And any Jew persecuted, I will stand with him today. But I am anti-Zionist. Most religious Jews are anti-Zionist. Zionism is not Jewish Zionism. There is no such thing. It's Christian Zionism, which sponsors political Zionism, and political Zionism is made up of atheist people that identify as Jews, but they're not really Jews. Okay, there's no DNA descendant from Judah at all, and they have no morality given to them from God because they don't believe in God. They're atheists, but they identify as Jews because it supports their cause or for whatever. So they're culturally Jews, but they don't actually believe the Torah. If they practice Passover or something, it's because they find it culturally fun to do, and that's the extent of it. And that's why they can commit these heinous crimes that they're committing. And they're doing it supported by Christian Zionism, because if it wasn't for Christian Zionism, they wouldn't have the ability to do this. And so when you enter the church and your preacher sacrifices you on the altar of Zionism by teaching you this heinous doctrine, which on the face of it sounds good, as the Bible says, the devil appears as an angel of light. Well, that also means his teaching appears as though it's a holy teaching, when it's not. You can look at the fruits and you'll know them. And you look at the fruit of what Israel is doing in Palestine and in Gaza, you know what it is. There's no excuse. There's no excuse. But watch my next video and I'll get into the origin of Christian Zionism. And I will show the occult connection and how Satan literally, through the apparition of a sacrificed sheep by the Druids, who is still conjured up even today, and teaches this heinous doctrine. Thank you, and look forward to my next video. Goodbye.
Sheep. The sheep is their god, just like in India they bow down to the cows. That's nothing new. The Egyptian worship two gods, the Nile, the river, and the sheep. That's why Hashem say, the first thing we should do to them is slaughter their god. Korban Pesach, the Passover sacrifice. What is it? It has to be lamb. And it has to be barbecue. You're not allowed to cook it. You're not allowed to steam it. You're not allowed to put it to roast it. It has to be barbecued. Why? That the smell of it will go all over Egypt. When the Jews barbecue their gods. If you cook it in the house, no one will know. I want them to go crazy that their gods is being eaten by the Jews. That they